Good morning or good afternoon, I don't know, and thank you for attending this session. My name is Anne-Flore. I'm a PhD student at Université Paris-Saclay, and I worked with Tinging He, Petra Eisenberg, and Tobias Eisenberg to create PREVis, an instrument to measure perceived readability in data visualization. Imagine you have built these two visualizations, and you do not know which one to recommend. You want to evaluate them, but based on which criteria? One criterion could be how readable people will find each visualization. Readable is a word that seems intuitively clear, but if you think about it more deeply, its meaning might be a bit fuzzy. In fact, during our literature review at the beginning of this project, we found a wide variety of terms used by participants and researchers in relation with the concept of readability. It's not surprising, as readability is an emergent quality at the interaction of three components: the visualization image, of course, but also the task at hand and its context, and the person doing the reading. This intrinsic complexity makes the concept of readability difficult to define precisely, not to mention the difficulty of defining boundaries around what reading activities are within a continuum of cognitive activities. So how can we measure readability in such a fuzzy context? A common approach is to use performance metrics such as time and error. However, higher level cognitive processes can influence performance even in low level tasks. For example, existing bias in the reader can affect the accuracy of answers, and interactive features in a system can affect speed. Subjective evaluation can complement performance measurements. By asking the reader to evaluate readability themselves, we can get a more comprehensive understanding of readability in data visualization. However, because researchers tend to have slightly different definitions of readability, they also tend to come up with their own questionnaires to collect subjective ratings in their studies. Such questionnaires might lack reliability and validity. To bridge that gap, we created PREVis, a standardized questionnaire to measure how readable people find data visualizations. We call it perceived readability to emphasize the subjective nature of the ratings collected using our instrument. We developed PREVis following a rigorous methodology. It was a long process, and the paper and its appendices contain all the details you might want to know, and then some. You can basically use our paper and the supplemental materials as a guide on how to develop a standardized questionnaire. So today I will only outline the major steps. We began by conducting a literature review and surveys with visualization experts to create candidate questions. Some of these experts might actually be looking at the video right now, so I wanted to take the opportunity of saying thank you. After completing this first part of the project, we tested our candidate questions with non-expert participants to improve the quality of the sentences. After that, we ran a large-scale crowdsourced study and conducted an exploratory factor analysis on the collected data. We found 4 factors of perceived readability and reduced the number of questions to 11. Finally, we ran another crowdsourced study as a last step to validate the final questionnaire. We confirmed the 4-factor structure, we verified the high reliability of the questions, and we validated the questionnaires' accuracy in targeting readability. This resulted in an instrument composed of 11 questions. For all of these 11 questions, respondents rate their agreement on a Likert scale with 7 points that are fully labeled, not numbered. This setup is important for improving the reliability of answers. Whenever possible, also consider using an I don't know, not applicable option, with optional free text fields. In our studies, we had less than 2% NA answers, but they yielded precious qualitative comments. And it allows people not to fall back on the middle point when they don't know what to answer. So, PREVis, the questionnaire is 11 questions across 4 groups. Each group can be considered a reliable psychological scale. A scale in psychology is a unidimensional measuring tool with validated psychometric properties. Scales are used as indicators of something we cannot observe directly, a latent variable, in our case, perceived readability. Each scale in PREVis reflects one of the 4 factors we discovered during the exploratory study and then confirmed during the validation study. The understand scale, the first one, relates to being able to make sense of the visual encodings. I'm going to pause now to let you read the sentences. So it has 3 items. Similarly, we have 3 items in the layout scale, which relates to the visual clarity or clutter in the visualization. The data read scale relates to the easiness of finding and reading data values in the visualization. And finally, the data feature scale relates to the easiness of reading patterns in the data, such as trends, outliers, or extremes. So the full PREVis questionnaire is 11 questions distributed across 4 factors or dimensions of perceived readability. However, it's important to resist the impulse of calculating an aggregate score. Instead, we need to analyze each scale score independently. For example, in our exploratory study, we used 6 images, for which we varied the type of complexity of the data and the canonical effectiveness of visual encodings. We also included another type of visualization, image E, to account for the effect of visualization literacy in readability. I'm going to focus on the result for stimuli D, E, and F briefly. In the understand scale, the line chart F is rated as much easier to understand than the novel representation E. But then, looking at ratings for layout clarity, it's actually the exact opposite. E is visually much clearer than F. For the data read scale, visualization E and F had very similar ratings, while D was clearly lower. But for the data features, visualizations D and E had very similar scores, while the line chart was rated better. These are not surprising findings, but we would not be able to make this kind of observation if we had an aggregate score. So, think of each PREVis scale as an individual measure. You need all of them to get a comprehensive view of how readable people will find a visualization, but it also means that you can use them independently if you're only interested in one of the factors. For example, if you're studying noodling visualizations, you might only be interested in comparing the layout clarity. We can't consider such data as a comprehensive measure of readability, but sometimes we're not interested in the full picture. In that case, it's fine to choose to use only the 3 questions in the PREVis layout scale. To conclude this presentation, I would like to share a few points to keep in mind if you want to use PREVis in one of your studies. First, you should use PREVis as a tool to complement other measures, such as reading task performance to compare different visualization or qualitative interviews if you're developing a new visualization tool, for example. Also, because readability tends to depend on the reader's task, you should first let people use the visualization for their task and then ask them about the readability. If you want to compare different visualizations, also consider letting the participants see all visualizations before you ask them to rate each of them with PREVis. This might help participants calibrate their rating, and it's particularly important if you have a small sample size and randomization might not be an effective strategy. Finally, there are a few important practicalities to know in order to ensure a high reliability of the data you will collect with PREVis. To help with that, we provide a hands-on companion guide with examples of study protocols. That companion guide and many other supplemental material can be found on OSF and GitHub, including the data and the code to reproduce our work or to produce figures for your own data analysis. You can find links to access all these resources on our website. Thank you for your attention, and I'm eager to hear your comments or questions about PREVis.